So I wanted to continue with some more background information regarding this series that I intend to do, where I show that some of the most mysterious passages in the Christian scriptures are more appropriately spoken by the Roman general turned emperor Titus Flavius, the man who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And this time we're going to talk about Onkelos and Aquila. Aquila meaning eagle. Now, again, setting this in its proper first century historical context, not the what shall we call it, Jesus-ocentric, Christian-ocentric, I don't know, picture of the first century that the so-called New Testament, the Christian scriptures, what I call the Christian addendum, not the picture that it paints, but the actual historical context of things that were going on in the first century. And that was that you had Jews who quite what's the word, expectantly wanted to live according to Jewish law and lived in Galilee, maybe parts of Samaria, I don't know, and Judea. And at the other end you have the Roman Empire inflicting its will upon Galilee and Judea, and they wanted to promote Roman law. So it's two sets of law being promoted. And of course the Christian scriptures paints the Roman law as being more acceptable than Jewish law, especially when you get into the Pauline epistles. Like if the Christian scriptures had been all about promoting Jewish law, we never, like no community in the world would have needed the Christian scriptures, because you already had all that in the Hebrew Tanakh. Rather, the Christian scriptures are pushing a more Gentile-friendly perversion of Judaism, because it was a mythology that was cooked up by the Roman Flavians who destroyed the temple. Who commenced the war with the Jews in Galilee, leading eventually to the destruction, the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, and then after that also the siege at Masada, which, like, some people are questioning what really happened at Masada, but you know, that's for academics to do. We've got a received history from Josephus on what happened at Masada. The mass suicide of Jews at Masada doesn't, it's kind of hard to accept given Jewish values. But who knows, maybe it happened anyway, because maybe they had seen what happened to Jews who were captured by Romans in Jerusalem. Maybe some survivors were able to convey stories about that, and maybe the survivors at Masada wanted nothing to do with that. But there do seem to be some parallels between the story of the siege of Masada and also the sieges of some of the other cities by the Roman Flavians and the legions that were with them. But anyway, let's go back to the historical context revolving around the Aquila, which is the term we're dealing with right now. And I should probably get a cough drop, because my voice will probably go out before long, because I'm not really someone who spends a lot of time talking, because I don't like to spend a lot of time talking about things I know very little about, and I don't really know much about most things. But like Edie Brickell said, I don't know too many things, but I know what I know, if you know what I mean. And this is an area where I've made it my business to know a few things, so I can talk a little bit about these things. So what happened in the first century? Well, a Roman legion was sent, let me see what the number was here. It was Legio 12 Fulminata, the Thunderbolt 12th Legion. And anyway, the history is given, or in a synopsis in Wikipedia, is that in 66 of the Common Era, after a zealot revolt had destroyed the Roman garrison in Jerusalem, the 12th Legion, Thunderbolt Legion, with their Vexallationos, what are those, detachment of the Roman Legion, formed as a temporary task force. They sound kind of like auxiliaries, but I'm not sure if that's the case. Some kind of subunit, I guess, or attached units of the 4th Scythica and the 6th Ferrata were sent to restore Roman authority. However, it'd be interesting to find out what those terms really mean there, but they were sent to restore Roman authority. However, after a defeat where the legion lost its Aquila, that's not probably what it looked like. I'll show you again what it looked like. Something closer to what it looked like. Gaius Cestius Gallus, legate of Syria, ordered the survivors to return to Syria. On its way back, the 12th Legion, Thunderbolt Legion, was ambushed and defeated by Eleazar ben Simon in the Battle of Beit Horon, or otherwise known as the Beit Horon Pass. So even after they'd been defeated in one battle, they were ambushed, the survivors were ambushed and defeated a second time. However, the 12th Legion, Fulminata, fought well in the last part of the war and supported its commander, Titus Flavius Vespasian. So that's Titus Flavius, is it Sabinus? His father. So essentially in the Christian scriptures, the Father in heaven. They supported its commander in his successful bid for the imperial throne. So I don't know if the 12th Legion accompanied Vespasian to Rome when he ascended to the imperial throne, at which time Titus was left behind in either Galilee or Judea to continue the war against the Jews. At the end of the war, the 12th Legion, Fulminata, and 16th Legion, Flavia Ferma, were sent to guard the Euphrates border, camping at such and such. Not too important to us, I guess, right? But so anyway, they lost their Aquila, and this is a modern replica or reconstruction of what an Aquila might have looked like. So not only do you have the eagle, which is an unclean bird, bird of prey, not kosher to eat in Jewish culture, but you also have these lightning bolts here, these thunderbolts. So anyway, so this idol was captured by these Jewish, allegedly Jewish zealots, and I think it's very possible, and it seems to be. Let me see if I could find this real quick. And I may have gotten this idea from either Robert Eisenman or Joseph Atwill somewhere. I think it's called The Eagle. What is it? Yeah. So there was this movie with Channing Tatum called The Eagle, and it says in Roman-ruled Britain, a young Roman soldier endeavors to honor his father's memory by finding his lost legion's golden emblem, which would have been the Aquila, the eagle. So I don't know if any of the legions lost their eagle in Britain, but at the Beit Horon Pass versus the Jews, a legion did lose their Aquila. So, but this is an interesting movie to watch because it seems to, in a veiled way maybe, interesting. Jeremy Brock. Who's this guy? I might know this person. No, I don't. I don't think it's. I don't think the person I knew was from Brussels, Belgium. Anyway, so anyway, this movie seems to support the idea that there may have been something more to this eagle, this Aquila. So my suspicion is, and again, I may have gotten this idea from either Eisenman or Atwill, is that the zealots, being that this is an idol of an unclean bird, they may have melted down the Aquila and then fashioned it into a menorah for the temple. And that's why in the Arch of Titus, which commemorates the victory of the Romans against the Jews in Jerusalem, or if not the whole campaign against Galilee and Judea, a big deal is made that the Romans are carrying back the menorah, or carrying the captured menorah to Rome. So my suspicion, again, it may not be an original thought. I want to make that very clear. Uh, my suspicion is that the Aquila was melted down and fashioned into a menorah, and that's why it's such a big deal for them to bring it back to Rome to restore the loss of honor in losing their military standard. So it's I think it's less that look, here we got, some Jewish treasure, some booty from war booty, but more that, hey, this is the Aquila that we lost. So that's my suspicion, which again may have been inherited. So where did our little entry go? Did I close it already? Anyway, let's talk something, or cover something about the menorah in the Second Temple period. period. So when the temple was rebuilt, there was only one menorah, not 10. The object is mentioned with some stress in the book of Chronicles, which was written immediately after the exile. That's when the the Jewish exiles from the southern kingdom of Judah, which I believe comprised the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Probably not all of Levi, because I think Levi had to reside throughout Israel, so some of Levi, I guess, would have resided in the northern kingdom, which had already been carried off into captivity, I think, by the Assyrians. Or was it the Akkadians? I don't remember, but I think it was the Assyrians. Anyway, but the southern kingdom of Judah was carried off into Babylon. So I believe that's the exile that's being referred to here. Especially since I don't think there was ever a corporate return of the northern kingdom of Israel to back to the land. Whereas with the southern kingdom of Judah, that happened because of Cyrus the Great of Persia was instrumental. Prophet Isaiah refers to him as the Messiah. I don't know if that's because he saw him as a messianic man for the day, or because he was just referring to him as a king. But nevertheless, he he is the man that the prophet Isaiah does refer to as Messiah by name, whereas Jesus, Isaiah never refers to as Messiah by name. So Isaiah was able to get Cyrus's name right, but never mentions Jesus. So anyway, and I believe that's the reason, because these returnees from the Babylonian exile were from the southern kingdom of Judah, that I believe that they began to corporately be called Jews. And I can show you what I'm talking about. And this is why, like, Johnny-come-lately Gentiles who believe themselves to be Israelites, they have such a problem with the term Jews, and especially since so many of them are white supremacists of one form or another. They don't see Jews to be a biblical term, but they certainly were a biblical term. There it is. So we can, I wish this was in, I wish it would just stay in the Revised Standard Version. So I always prefer to click on the concordance for the original, the word in the original language, because sometimes the word in the original language is translated in different ways in a translation, so it's not accurate, and it's often, and the way it's translated is often biased by Christian presuppositions and prejudices. So here the word is looks like Yehudai, but the plural is Yehudim, and here it's Yehudi for a single Jew. And here it says a Jehudaite or Judahite, meaning like a person of the Jews. So here it is. So yeah, so even though we saw in English that the word Jews occurred in the English translation a few times before Ezra chapter 4, I clicked on Ezra chapter 4 because I believe that to be the first mention of the Jews returning from the captivity. And then here we see, if we click on that word in Hebrew, that Ezra chapter 4 is the first occurrence of that word. So why that word occurs in the English translation when it's not there in the Hebrew, I don't know. That's a good question. Unless it's just to provide explanation, I don't know. And this is why I prefer literal translations. So, so in Ezra chapter 4, be it known unto the king that the Jews which came up from thee to us are come unto Jerusalem, building the rebellious and the bad city. So that was first used as a, well, I don't want to say it was used as a racial slur. It could just be just a reference to their ethnicity. But somewhere here it says, so I think this is Ezra chapter 6. I think this is Cyrus here. Yeah, in the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king made a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be builded, the place where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 60, etc., etc. And then says, take these utensils from the temple and place them in the house of God, that is the temple. House is the same word often translated temple. And then he said, let the work of this house of God alone, like don't interfere with it. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God in his place. Moreover, I make a decree that what ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of this house of God, that of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river, forthwith expenses be given unto these men, that they be not hindered. So then he actually gave funds for the rebuilding of the temple, and then also livestock and produce for the sacrifices at the temple. So this is all what Cyrus the Great of Persia did. And this is a type of the Messiah according to Maimonides. This is a man who's fulfilling the requirements of the eschatological Messiah. Because I've already pointed out in another video that this term Messiah is a mundane term. It's one that's been used over and over again for numerous men, both kings of Israel and also high priests of Israel. And again, for Cyrus, who isn't even Jewish. So, like, for all the work that goes into proving that Jesus is actually from a messianic line, like the prophet Isaiah shows that you don't even have to be Jewish to be called the Messiah of the day. Maybe to be the eschatological Messiah, yes, but to be the man of the day, for the time, it would appear that you don't have to be Jewish to fulfill God's purpose for the children of Israel at that time, whatever it is. You know, it's kind of like Esther. You know, she was instrumental for the time, you know, for her people. So, anyway, I can close this. Here's back to the history. So, later, there's something interesting about this, but it happens a while. So this is in 162 or 166, or around then. There was an episode of miraculous rain and lightning saving a 12th Legion subunit from defeat, and that's reported by the sources. At this time, most of the 12th was composed chiefly of Christians. That's because Christianity was the Roman state religion pushed by the Roman Flavians, and apparently it was quite popular. And I wouldn't doubt it if part of the reason that this legion was comprised of so many Christians, of course this is according to Christian sources, I'm sure, was that they were there at the formation of the Christian mythology, so of course they would subscribe to it, knowing who Jesus really was. And that's not even a requirement, just obedience to the Roman Flavians. And then upholding their military tradition could have played a part in it. But there was a belief that this had led to the emperor issuing a decree forbidding the persecution of the Christians, but this seems to have been based on a forgery. Anyway, so this is the legion that was defeated, who had its Aquila stolen. So, now, let's see if I can find it. So there are I searched for Aquila, Flavius Josephus, to see about mentions of Aquila. Apparently there was an Aquila who gave someone a finishing stroke. We can look more at that in a second. There was also an Aquila who was governor of Alexandria. Alexandria was like a Hellenistic Jewish city, at least part of it. There was a neighborhood of a community of supposedly Hellenistic Jews, especially since they had like their own temple at Heliopolis at one point. that was actually prophesied about also by the prophet Isaiah, I believe. Which, when I learned that, that just blew me away. That I had never heard such a thing before. And I think I think I did read something about it way back when I was about 22, and I was reading Hugh Nibley's works back when I was a Mormon missionary, and he was, you know, endeavoring to prove the case that it was permissible to have temples not in Jerusalem, even though the Torah says that the house for the Creator is supposed to be built in the place where His name resides, which seems to be understood from the Hebrew Tanakh to be Jerusalem. So, but that temple in Heliopolis was an aberration. It wasn't like there were lots of other Jewish temples all over the place, but then Hugh Nibley, if I remember correctly, tries to go on to show that the synagogue is a is like a mini temple meant to preserve the rituals of the temple service to some degree. So his argument is that synagogues are also temples, which, to a, you know, in a semantic sense, yeah, because a temple is just a translation of the Hebrew word bet, or house. So, you know, it's like saying building. So, I mean, but there are no like animal sacrifices happening in synagogues all throughout the diaspora that I know of. I could be wrong. So I think that's a bit of a stretch to say that the synagogue is the temple, except in a very what's the word, diminished way. So let me close this. So here, this mention of Aquila and Flavius Josephus, it's talking about it says how Caius was slain by Sharia. Anyway, seems to be a lot about Roman history here. What's going on with Romans? So apparently there was some guy named Aquila, and yeah. So, you know, as we saw in the book Our Italian Surnames, Aquila seems to have been a somewhat known name for Romans. So I'll close this because I'm not drawing any hard connections there. I'm just showing that so here it says the Babylonian Talmud repeats the same oral tradition. Okay, this is talking about a proselyte by the name of Onkelos, I guess, in one place, and Aquila in another. So they're saying that this leads one to conclude that the name is a mere variant of Aquila applied in error to the Aramaic instead of the Greek translation. This view is supported by Epiphanius of Salamis in the 4th century. So, and if you search for Onkelos as Aquila, there's all kinds of entries about it. They really designate one and the same person. Somewhere here it says that the name Aquilus closely resembles Onkelos in the Palestinian pronunciation. The ayin is pronounced as a nasal sound and resembles a noon. So it says creators of the Mishnah, Onkelos or Aquilus or Aquilas. I should probably be pronouncing that as a hard Q or a hard K sound there, like a hard Q without the U. According to the Greek, Aquilus, the proselyte. So, and here it's somewhere I saw where it said that whereas Onkelos is the primary, or Targum Onkelos is the primary Jewish Aramaic Targum or translation of the Torah, accepted as an authoritative translated text of the 5 books of Moses. Somewhere it said that Aquila was the person who, yeah, here it is. Onkelos, this is encyclopedia.com. Onkelos and Aquila, 2nd century CE, supposedly, 2 translators of the Bible, the one into Aramaic and the other into Greek, both of whom were proselytes, meaning to Jerusalem, or to Judaism, not to Christianity. I don't think. Maybe, who knows, maybe Aquila was a proselyte to Christianity. We know Aquila from his being a companion of Paul in, I think, the book of Acts. This was a little something about how reliable Josephus is. Which, I mean, you can pause the screen and read that if you want. It's worth going over real quick. And like I was just talking about, Acts chapter 18 verses 1 and 2, after this Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he found a Jew named Aquila. Here he's a Jew, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Then, quoted in Flavius Josephus's Antiquities, Tiberius ordered the whole Jewish community to leave Rome. The consuls drafted 4,000 of these Jews for military service and sent them to the island of Sardinia, but they penalized a good many of them who refused to serve for fear of breaking the Jewish law. Thus the Jews were banished from the city for the wickedness of 4 men. Josephus describes a temporary expulsion of Jews from Rome under Emperor Tiberius, but not a later one under Claudius, who reigned from 41 to 54. However, the Roman author Suetonius, writing several years after Josephus, briefly mentions that Claudius expelled the Jews from the city because of continuous disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus. Now, Christians will cite this passage as historical proof of Christianity, whereas we see that the 12th Legion, Fulminata, they weren't Christians until 160 AD. They certainly weren't Christians when they were fighting the Jews at the Beit Horon Pass. So, but I think it's Eisenman who says that this Chrestus may actually be referring to Herod Agrippa, or one of the Agrippas, in referring to his graciousness or his mercifulness, kind of like the word chesed in Hebrew. So to continue, this is puzzling, as Claudius was a firm friend of the Jews, Josephus emphasizes. In fact, he was a close friend since childhood of Agrippa I, who assisted him in gaining the throne. Josephus's view of Claudius is unrelievedly favorable, which may have been dangerous because the Flavians, weren't crazy about the Julio-Claudians. Does this mean that Josephus did not want to mention this anti-Jewish action because of a bias towards Claudius? Or does it mean the action was so small and irrelevant to the Jews as to be neither worth mentioning nor able to have any effect on Josephus's opinion of the emperor? A modern analysis of all available evidence is given in Jerome Murphy O'Connor's Paul: A Critical Life, of course. It's always about the hero Paul. The most probable scenario we can construct, he determines, is that the action of Claudius was small, and that of course Christians are going to downplay the tragedy of anything done to Jews, and that he expelled from the city only Jews who were not Roman citizens. Christian missionaries would have been in this group. They may have been causing conflict with the Jews of the city by their proselytizing. Murphy O'Connor dates this action to 41, but doubts that Luke is accurate in associating it with Paul's arrival in Corinth. So that would have been a mere 8 years after the alleged death of Jesus. There were not Christian missionaries 8 years later in a conflict with Jews at Rome. That's complete, and that's just a historical baloney. It's just Christians. It's Christians interpreting first century history based on the pseudo-history of the first century provided by the Christian scriptures, where the Flavians, who were engaged in the military campaign against the Jews in 69 and 70, were beginning to craft the Christian myth and backdating prophecies that they were themselves at that time fulfilling in order to make themselves look like that they were prophesied about by supposed prophets who lived 40 years earlier, or 37 to be more accurate probably. They're just, when you actually go looking for historical support for like an empire-wide Christianity in the first century, it all melts and evaporates. There isn't any. What you see in the book of Revelation is that there seem to have been these congregations, most if not all of them, part of the empire of the Flavians. Let me see. There was a map recently I saw. Roman Empire. Let's see. Map of the Roman Empire under the Flavian dynasty. Is it this one? I don't think it was this exact one, but so was Okay, so here's Palmyra. Was Palmyra? Maybe I'm getting that wrong. And I can't seem to scroll this. Okay, here we go. So, Dalmatia, where's Pergamum? That would be, Pergamum would be Greece, right? I'm not seeing it. Anyway, look, you even got a city named after eagles, it looks like, up there. So, you can Ephesus, was that one of them? It's been a while, I'd have to go down the list. But, you can check out this map for yourself and see what congregations from the book of Revelation actually fall within the Roman Empire of the 1st century, and you can kind of begin to see that Christianity's formation was carried out by the Roman Flavians, who had control of this whole area. It certainly was. It certainly wasn't this tiny little strip of land right here exporting this like quasi-pagan religion all over the Roman Empire. It was the Roman Empire disseminating this message throughout the Roman Empire. Follow the money, like they say. So, so here's Aquilus. So this is Greek number 207 in the Strong's Concordance. Here it acknowledges that Aquila equals an eagle. A Jew of Pontus, a tent maker, convert to Christ, companion and ally of Paul in propagating Christianity. And so it says here tent maker. It doesn't say anything about translator of scripture, either into Aramaic or Greek. And then here are the occurrences, Acts, Romans, there it is again, like a Pauline epistle, in a supposedly Jewish messianic religion, a Pauline epistle named Romans, in the 1st century when the Romans destroyed the temple and laid siege to Jerusalem, exterminating Jewish women and children along with the men. So, Romans, greet Priscilla and Aquila, my helpers, and 1 Corinthians, Aquila and Priscilla salute you. 2 Timothy, possibly spurious, I'd have to look at that again. Salute Prisca instead of Priscilla and Aquila, and the household of Onesiphorus, if I remember correctly. Is Onesiphorus the same as Onesimus? Philemon had or Philemon, whatever, had a slave by the name of Onesimus, which means profitable. Onesiphorus means bringer profit, bringer blessing. I thought that there was another in the Roman Empire by this name. Let's see. Maybe not, but I thought Eisenman made a connection with this. According to the letter sent by St. Paul, Onesiphorus sought out Paul, who was imprisoned at the time in Rome. Let me check something out. Where... Onesimus. No. Must have been a different name I'm thinking of. It's probably Epaphroditus I'm thinking of. Epaphroditus. So, what is this? Philippians? And yeah, and the funny thing about this name is it's in the sense of someone who's devoted to Aphrodite, the pagan god Aphrodite, or Venus. Here it's not saying anything. Now Epaphroditus, I'm almost certain, was part of the Roman Empire. Anyway, but it's like whenever you try to see if there's like some kind of connection between these figures in the Roman Empire and the people who are name dropped in the Christian addendum, like the commentaries just try to sweep it under the rug, say, oh, there's no connection there. That's if they even point out the fact that there's a historical figure of the same name. So and then they'll often say, oh, it's a really common name, you know, so there's no way it could be the same person, even though they lived at the same time, you know. So anyway, so we know about this companion of Paul who's named Eagle, the same as the Roman military standard. And so, and then this was just me looking up pictures of the Menorah. Now somewhere here it said something about anyway, it's not here, but it's in one of these articles. It says that there are eagles and serpents portrayed on the bottom, that this octagonal base wasn't there in any pictures of the menorah that are found before its capture. And one theory is that the Romans constructed this base in order to stabilize it so it wouldn't topple over, and that's why there are these idols of animals on the bottom. And we've already talked about the Legion, so I'll close that. But I'm thinking that part of the reason there may be eagles depicted on that base is because that the Romans knew that the menorah that they captured had been melted down from their Aquila. So let's see, there was some okay, so I think I stopped reading here. So let's pick up. This lampstand, or menorah, is described by Flavius Josephus and shown on the Arch of Titus in Rome. The lower part of the central shaft shows an oriental design very much like the columns of Persepolis. It is perfectly possible that the menorah made by Judas the Maccabean is an accurate copy of a candelabrum, or, like candle stand, made immediately after the return from the Babylonian exile. Alternatively, the last mentioned menorah, although taken away by Antiochus, may be the fourth, may have been given back at some unknown moment. So they're trying to theorize where this menorah came from that was carried off by the Romans. Like I said, I think it was melted down from the captured Aquila. By now the menorah was never extinguished. According to Josephus, 3 candles burned permanently. The others were lighted only during the night. Cleaning, lighting, and trimming was among the tasks of the priests. After the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE, thanks to the Roman Flavians, the menorah was brought to Rome. The representation on the Arch of Titus poses a minor problem because the pedestal and octagon is different from all other representations, which nearly always show the menorah with 3 legs. Worse, the octagon shows eagles with garlands in their beaks and capricorns on its upper tier, and aquatic animals on its lower tier. These symbols are not known from Judean art of the centuries BCE and violate the second of the 10 Commandments. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Eagles and water snakes do not belong on a Jewish cultic object. Several solutions have been proposed, which all have their problems. Perhaps this is not the real menorah, but what's the point of carrying it around in a triumph? Perhaps the pedestal is a Roman restoration because the menorah was damaged during the sack of Jerusalem, says no evidence. Perhaps the pedestal is in fact a litter designed to give the object stability during the procession, perhaps the least implausible explanation. However this may be, the menorah was in Rome and was deposited with other cult objects from the Temple of Jerusalem in the Temple of Peace in Rome. The Temple of Peace was built, I believe, by the Roman Flavians, and I'm not sure, but I think a copy of the Torah may have been deposited there. But it was, the Temple of Peace, I think, was erected right on the heels of their return, their victorious return from Jerusalem. The temple treasures may have been transferred to another place after the Temple of Peace was destroyed in a great fire in 192, and were probably taken to Carthage by the Vandals, who sacked Rome in 455. Here the menorah was among the objects seized by the Byzantine general Belisarius. So here we've got, I guess, historical testimony that this general saw the menorah in Carthage in 534. 534 CE. Someone is saying that the Menorah was in Carthage. In his Vandal Wars, Procopius states that the sacred objects of the Jews were brought to Constantinople and carried through the streets during Belisarius's triumphal procession. If Procopius is to believe, the Menorah was almost immediately sent back to Jerusalem because a Jew told Justinian that the lampstand had brought disaster to every city where it had been. The object's presence in Jerusalem, however, is not recorded, perhaps because Palestine, so-called, was later conquered by the Persians and Arabs. So that's kind of interesting. So that leads us to believe that there really was a physical object looking like a menorah and not like an Aquila. And since this article can't seem to state matter-of-factly how that menorah came to be, I think it's melted down from the Aquila, and that's why it was such a big deal to picture it on the Arch of Titus. So here I just looked up the Hebrew word for menorah, and I wasn't able to really make any connections to the concept of an eagle. There's a word, I think, in Hebrew, I think, for an eagle. Let me see. Is that really it? A nesher? But here it says a griffin, vulture, or an eagle. Yeah, and it seems to be that's how it's typically translated, as eagle. So, and here it's talking about Onkelos. Now, Onkelos is supposed to have been the author of the Aramaic, I guess, translation of the Torah. And look at the connection we have here to Onkelos. So it says Onkelos, possibly identical to Aquila of Sinope, was a Roman national who converted to Judaism in Tanaic times. Note the dates. That's 35 to 120 of the Common Era. So that's the earliest date is 2 years after the alleged death of Jesus, but smack dab surrounding the reign of the Roman Flavians. He is considered to be the author of the Targum Onkelos. Onkelos is mentioned several times in the Talmud. According to the traditional Jewish sources, he was a prominent Roman nobleman, the son of a man named Callinicus. I don't know. Callinicus? That might be Quinicus? That sounds like the names of one of the Roman generals, and maybe one of the months of the year in the Julian calendar, maybe? I don't know. And the sister of Titus. So, let's see, he was a prominent Roman nobleman, the son of a man, probably a Roman general, and the sister of Titus, the Roman emperor. So he was Titus's nephew. According to the Midrash, Tanhuma, he was a nephew of Hadrian and not Titus. Neither of these assertions are historical. Hadrian's sister, his only sibling, had a daughter, and the only known child of either of Titus's siblings to survive to adulthood was also a girl, later known as Saint Flavia Domitilla. Nevertheless, the story goes that his uncle, the emperor, advised Onkelos to go out and find something that wasn't worth much today but would be invaluable in the future. Onkelos found Judaism. Onkelos' conversion is the subject of a story wherein he first consulted with the spirits of 3 deceased enemies of Israel to see how Israel fared in the next world. Oh yeah, and that's a passage I wanted to go over again. The first was his uncle Titus, who was blamed for the destruction of the Second Temple. Like, it's attributed to him by history, so I don't know if they're really saying... I mean, certainly he was instrumental in it, but like, the Jewish people always seem to blame the destruction on something they did, like as if to say, like, what bearing could a non-Jew possibly have on the Creator's execution of punishment or justice upon his special possession, the children of Israel? You know, like, how could what a non-Jew does or doesn't do result in the punishment of the children of Israel? So Jews naturally assumed that it was something that they did that resulted in that tragedy. So the second person named was it says seer Balaam, but false prophet Balaam, or Bilam, hired by Balak, king of Moab, to curse Israel. Balaam is the prototypical false prophet, and I think it's even said that Balaam, it wasn't that Balaam's prophecies were false, it was that he was against Israel. You know, he sought to curse Israel, but then the Creator, if I remember correctly, the Creator made him speak blessings or prophecies that were favorable to Israel. And then finally the last was Yeshu, in other words Jesus, a name used for those... Oh, okay, that's a gloss. A name used for those who sought to lead Jews astray to idolatry, in particular an idolatrous former student of Joshua ben Parachia in the Hasmonean period, as well as Manasseh of Judah. In later writings, Yeshua is used for Jesus, but opinions differ over whether it can be understood this way in the Talmud. I thought what I read actually said Jesus the Nazarene, which can't be mistaken for anybody else but the New Testament Jesus. Anyway, but if we assume that it's talking about Jesus the Nazarene, the structure of that passage, talking about Titus, Balaam, and Jesus, to me, that's like asking the reader to see that Jesus is Titus, and that Jesus is a false prophet. Part of the reason being that Jesus is really Titus, right? So he's not a prophet like Moses. He didn't come from the children of Israel. So he's a false prophet. He doesn't fit the Torah's definition of a prophet who is for the children of Israel. Like, how can you have a prophet come to you, a guy who eats lobster and crab cakes and octopuses, octopi, coming to you to deliver a message about how you need to obey the Torah better? You know, it's laughable. This is like one reason, like, Muhammad was not received as a prophet, because he's an unlearned Gentile who didn't know the Torah, and he's going to come to the Jewish people who are commanded to keep and guard the Torah to say that, oh, by the way, that old thing that you guys are doing, that's not the program anymore. This other thing that I'm teaching, that's the program that God's doing now. When the Torah explicitly tells them, commands them not to fear that man who comes delivering that message. So there's there's no way that faithful Jews could have ever accepted either Jesus or Muhammad as true prophets, because they already had the Torah in Hebrew, and they could read it in Hebrew, and the Torah commanded them against those very things. Yet the Christian addendum tries to say, oh, you know what, the Jews, they were blind, they were spiritually blind, they didn't really know what the Torah really said. Well, no, it's the Gentiles who can't read the Torah in its original language, who don't even understand the surface meaning of the Torah, much less the other three levels of meaning in the Hebrew scriptures. It's the audacity of a person who's ignorant. You know, it's like a teenager who has all the answers, who thinks they know everything just because they picked up a Bible yesterday. And you know what? When you get in with these people who picked up a Bible yesterday and they're very zealous for what they're reading, and they do have a will to do God's will, but when they're also being programmed by the Christian addendum to hate the Jews and to think that the Jews somehow missed the program, and that by supposedly having the Holy Spirit they somehow become better experts on the Hebrew Tanakh and what it's saying than the 5-year-old Jews who can actually read it in Hebrew, you know, that's a recipe for 2,000 years of killing Jews. Because, you know, if you think the Jews are the enemy of God, well, then you've got license to kill them, don't you? And that's certainly the license that Muslims think they have. But both religions primarily serve the prejudices and predispositions and the ignorance of non-Jews. So, whereas these extremists in these religions who have killed Jews and want to kill Jews, whereas they have the time to hate Jews and to vocalize their hatred of Jews, they don't have the time, it appears, to attempt to understand Jews and understand why Jews don't conform to their picture of what Jews should be. So, to continue, let's see. So the earlier Jerusalem Talmud gives the subject of these stories as Aquilus, the proselyte, often understood as being a person other than Onkelos. The difficulty with this theory, however, is that the Jerusalem Talmud says explicitly that he, Aquilus the proselyte, translated the Torah under Eleazar ben Hyrcanus and Joshua ben Hananiah. The Babylonian Talmud repeats the same oral tradition, but this time calls him by the name Onkelos the proselyte, which leads one to conclude that the name is a mere variant of Aquila applied in error to the Aramaic instead of the Greek tradition, and this view is supported by Epiphanius of Salamis. And then And then it talks about his conversion to Judaism, which you can read for yourself. So, one thing that I've heard it said, was it in this passage? Why did I go here? Ah, here it is. Okay, so the reason I was in Luke chapter 4 is for this reason. So one thing I've read or been told is that in this passage what Jesus is supposedly reading is the Aramaic translation of the prophet Isaiah. But the Targum apparently is just a translation of the 5 books of Moses, and then Onkelos is supposed to have lived after this period of time. So it may have been an Aramaic translation that he was reading of the prophet Isaiah, but it wasn't. If this is in the 30s of the Common Era, which I'm telling you it's not. This did not happen in the 30s. This happened, or is pictured as happening in the 30s, but was written in the late 60s and early 70s. And maybe the book of Luke might have been even a little later. I don't know, but Mark would have been the earliest. But let's just read it. So it says Jesus returned in power into Galilee. Okay, that's what Titus did. And a report concerning him went out through all the surrounding country. That's what happened when Titus came to Galilee with the Roman legions, or at least Vespasian. I'm not sure. At some point, Titus links up with Vespasian. I think Titus was there in Galilee, even with Vespasian. So, but based on a miracle that I think takes place in the book of Mark, I think that originally Jesus may have represented Vespasian, but as soon as Vespasian went to go be emperor, Titus from then on was Jesus in a literary disguise. But again, it has to do with how the Gospels depend on each other, and most scholars believe that Mark is the earliest of the Gospels and that the other Gospels depend on Mark. And I think that this miracle that Vespasian did, it's well known, I think that's in the book of Mark. I could be wrong. But I think, like, very early in the writing of these, that Vespasian may have been the guy, the hero at first, but then when Vespasian returns to Rome, which would be the Roman heaven, then I think Vespasian becomes the father in heaven, whereas Titus, who's left behind to finish the work, he's the beloved son. So anyway, it says that Jesus came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and he went to the synagogue, as his custom was, on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read, and there was given to him the book, and it wouldn't have been a book like a codex. I think that was like a later invention. It was given to him probably the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. he opened the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." And he closed the book and gave it back to the attendant and sat down, and the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." And all spoke well of him and wondered at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. You know, he's always pictured as like, wow, his arguments, they just blow away anything the rabbis ever or the sages ever came up with themselves, right? And it's just like, oh wow, he speaks with authority. Well, yeah, when you're when you're a Roman general, yeah, you speak with authority, especially since you've got like a whole cohort there with you who can kill the people who you know, don't clap when you speak. So so he says, "Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." And all spoke well of him and wondered at the gracious words. And they said, "Is this not Joseph's son?" Which is, you know, interesting, because Titus had Josephus as his companion, as a Jewish prisoner of war. And he said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Physician, heal yourself. What we have heard you do at Capernaum, do here also in your own country.' And he said to you, 'Truly I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his own country.'" And then he says some other stuff, and and then when they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath towards a fellow Jew, mind you, right? When the Torah commands them to love their fellow Jew. And they rose up and put him out of the city, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him down headlong. So they were just going to summarily, without the Sanhedrin, you know, having any case, no judicial proceedings, they were just going to summarily execute Jesus for saying this. Never mind that rabbis have said probably much more controversial things to each other in the Jewish oral tradition. But passing through the midst of them, he went away. And in the New Media Bible, it's always funny how that's depicted, because there's this crowd, right? They're all surrounding him and they're ready to throw him, and then it just cuts to a scene where he's all of a sudden outside the crowd, and then he just walks away. He just gets away somehow by magic. But this is more a description of Titus when he's surrounded by the Jews who are trying to kill him, because he's a Roman general and they're trying to defend Jerusalem. But if we go up here, I wanted to point out something about the temptations, because this is one of those passages that much more refers to Titus than it does to Jesus. And the devil took him up. Usually devils refer to Jews, so this is like the old conspiracy theory of the evil Jew who controls the world. And the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said to him, "To you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to whom I will." So this is totally a scenario for a Roman emperor, right? Which, as son of Vespasian, Titus certainly was a candidate to succeed his father as emperor. But if you then will worship me, I guess the Jewish people, it shall all be yours. And this also mirrors where Josephus tells Vespasian that he fulfills this prophecy, the star out of Jacob prophecy of the Torah, and almost tells him like, hey, this passage of the Torah, it's really talking about you, and that's why you should go to Rome and become emperor. So there you actually have the Jew telling the Roman that he should go and become emperor and have all the kingdoms of the world, as part of the Roman Empire. all the kingdoms of the known world, of course. So then it says he took him to Jerusalem, and the devil, I guess, and set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. Now, this is a historical reference or allusion to the burning of the temple, when the priests were standing on high places in the temple and then threw themselves into the fire of the burning temple. And then, for it is written, he will give his messengers charge of you to guard you. And then it says, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. That one always seemed strange. It's like everybody knows about the pain of stubbing your toe, right? But striking your foot against a stone is actually another historical reference, again to Titus and Vespasian, of the siege of, here it's called Yodfat, but in Josephus it's called Jotapata, I think. Anyway, this is a really long I thought there was a reference to Jotapata in the Christian scriptures, but I wasn't able to find it quickly. But let's see. So here's a really long passage about Vespasian marches to Jotapata or Yodfat, and anyway, Josephus is here, and he's actually battling against Vespasian and Titus in their siege against this city in Galilee. And so I'm just going to read this paragraph. After these men's performances, Josephus and the rest of the multitude with him took a great deal of fire and burnt both the machines, siege engines, and their coverings with, I think they may have actually been siege towers, and their coverings with the works belonging to the 5th and to the 10th legions, which they put to flight, when others followed them immediately and burned those instruments and all their materials underground. However, about the evening the Romans erected the battering ram again against that part of the wall which had suffered before, where a certain Jew that defended the city from the Romans hit Vespasian with a dart in his foot, and wounded him a little, the distance being so great that no mighty impression could be made by the dart thrown so far off. So there it uses the word impression, so I think that this dart may have actually been a stone, just like Romans were lobbing stones into Yodfat. I think the defenders of the city were probably throwing stones out of Yodfat. However, this caused the greatest disorder among the Romans, for when they stood near him, saw his blood, they were disturbed at it, and a report went abroad through the whole army that the general was wounded, while the greatest part left the siege and came running together with surprise and fear to the general. And before them all came Titus out of the concern he had for his father, insomuch that the multitude were in great confusion, and this out of the regard they had for the general, and by reason of the agony that the son was in. Yet did the father soon put an end to the son's fear, and to the disorder the army was under, for, being superior to his pains, and endeavoring soon to be seen by all that had been in a fright about him, he excited them to fight the Jews more briskly, for now everybody was willing to expose himself to danger immediately, in order to avenge their general, and they encouraged one another with loud voices, and ran hastily to the walls. So this is exactly what's being said here. He will give his messengers charge of you to guard you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. So, if you want, you can read more about this siege either in Flavius Josephus's The Wars of the Jews, or here in this Wikipedia entry. And I'll close this entry in Josephus, and I don't think I need this anymore. And then finally the Greek word aetos means an eagle. Since eagles do not usually go in quest of carrion, this may be a vulture that resembles an eagle. I'm not sure that, like, I'm not sure that Jews, like, even knew the difference, maybe. And then look here, for aetos it says an eagle as a standard for the Roman military, a military standard, or the Aquila. So this is like the Greek word for Aquila, or the Greek translation of Aquila. So this takes us to the little apocalypse of Matthew chapter 24. And this is mirrored in Luke chapter 17. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles, the Aquilas, be gathered together. And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. So, let's look at this. And I'd really like to do it in a better translation. Bibles. My standard version. So wherever the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together. So this is in response to, where is Christ? Where is the Messiah? If anyone says to you, Lo, here is the Christ, or the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the very chosen. Here it says elect. Lo, I have told you beforehand, or in other words, look, I've told you this already. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. The lightning. Right? these thunderbolts here. Wherever the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together. The eagles, the Aquilas. Now, like Christian interpretation will say, like, eagles represent spiritual vision, blah blah blah. They'll give it like some metaphorical, mystical mumbo-jumbo, right? When there is a historical fulfillment of this in the first century. So this shows that Titus is the fulfillment of the second coming, because they wrote the first coming in a backdated fashion, supposedly taking place in the 30s CE, but the historical fulfillment, which they already knew was happening because they were living it, was set in the late 60s and the early 70s CE. And he will send out his messengers with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his chosen from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So they're just pulling in legions. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, just like Titus with the legions. After the trouble of those days, the sun will be darkened from smoke rising from besieged cities. The moon won't give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. From the fig tree, so right following that, from the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So that's usually taken to refer to Israel. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates, just like Titus laying siege to Jerusalem. Truly, okay, mind you, this is Jesus supposedly saying this, truly I say to you, this generation, which they love to translate that as referring to people in a specific period of time, but that word refers to ethnicity. It's more properly translated, this race will not pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But that day and hour no one knows, not even the messengers of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Again, there's the Father-Son duo, Vespasian and Titus. Here it even calls it the glorious return in this Bible. So when you see the desolating, scrolling back a bit, so when you see the desolating sacrilege spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. Let him who is in the field not turn back to take his mantle. And alas for those who are with child, and for those who give suck in those days, those who are nursing in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on Shabbat, which I think it was close to Passover, so it wasn't in winter, I don't believe. And then great trouble for the sake of the chosen, those days will be shortened. So if you've read about the siege of Jerusalem and Flavius Josephus, this really falls into place. And it's a much more plausible explanation of the creation of the Christian myth than anything else we've been given. tell us, when will this be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the close of the age? So that would be like maybe the close of the Jewish age of at least some measure of autonomy, at least as regards the temple. Or it could be the close of the age of the Julio-Claudians and the beginning of the Roman Flavians. But let's look at it in Luke. So here he's talking about Sodom. That's destruction of a city. That's a good parallel for Jerusalem when it was besieged by Titus. And they said to him, "Where, Lord?" He said to them, "Where the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together." And then that chapter ends. Let's see if it continues in the next chapter. No, it's continuing with a parable on prayer, it looks like. So, not as much as in Matthew. So we're talking about these terms, Aquila and Onkelos, or these names rather, but then Aquila is also a term for the Roman military standard, where it's made up of an eagle, and at least in this likeness it has lightning bolts or thunderbolts. And we see how whoa, wait a second. We did kind of skip that, didn't we? Let's go back there. There it is. Or maybe I already covered that. For as the lightning cometh out of the east. So there's not only the element of the eagles here, but there's also the element of the lightning in the verse before it. So here's your eagle, here's your lightning. And this is why the Christian addendum is not written in the same language as the Dead Sea Scrolls. If it was really a Jewish messianic body of literature, it could have been, because the Dead Sea Scrolls are a messianic Jewish body of literature, and they're not written in Greek. I think there are some manuscripts in there that are Greek, but that's, I think, just because, like, incidentally they were there, because most of the manuscripts are in Hebrew or Aramaic, as the case may be. So that would partially explain why this literature is so popular with non-Jews and became so popular very early on, because it was disseminated by those who sponsored its authorship if they didn't write it themselves. Vespasian and Titus. I'm not sure, I'm less clear on what role Domitian might have had in all this, because I don't think he was the beloved son. I think he was the less favored son, maybe like the prodigal son, although the prodigal son, when he returns, he's given more honors than the other son. I think that whole prodigal son story is referring to Vespasian and his two sons. But so this literature, this supposedly Messianic Jewish literature, is more ubiquitous. It's more present in the homes of non-Jews than the definitely more Hebraic Messianic Jewish literature from the same time period, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I'm sorry, you can consider me superstitious, but I really believe that the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls is like a divine stamp of approval on the reestablishment of the state of Israel. It's like the Creator is saying, okay, the time of the Gentiles has come to an end, and Israel's back, baby. And to prove it, here's all this Jewish scripture that you guys didn't know about. And just like he's saying, here's all this Jewish land that you guys didn't know about. Because Israel was reestablished in 1948, and if we look real quick, they were discovered in 1946, 1947 to 1956. So initial discovery was from 1946 to 1947, and then in early September 1948, let's check something else. Google. May 14th, so in 1948. So in early September, that would have been June, July, August, 4 months later, this bishop brought some additional scroll fragments that he had acquired to Professor Sellers, the new director of ASOR, by the end of 1948, nearly 2 years after the discovery of the scrolls. Scholars had yet to locate the original cave where the fragments had been found. With unrest in the country at the time, no large-scale search could be safely undertaken. Sellers tried to persuade the Syrians to assist in the search for the cave, but he was unable to pay their price. In early 1949, the government of Jordan granted permission to the Arab Legion to search the area in which the original Qumran cave was believed to exist. Consequently, Cave 1 was rediscovered on the 28th of January 1949 by Belgian United Nations observer Captain Philippe Lippens and Arab Legion Captain. So, just like the United Nations, a Gentile organization, was instrumental in the reestablishment of the State of Israel, Gentiles were instrumental in the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And some of them being Arabs. And yet, Arabs today will try to tell you that this land really belonged to Arabs and not to Jews, when they're the ones that discovered more of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they know that the Dead Sea Scrolls are not in Arabic. So, So these Romans who made war with the Jews brought the legions into Galilee and Judea, laid siege to Jerusalem, executed Jewish men, women, and children in great numbers, who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, even though Roman law was that you were not to damage the religious edifices of other religions. And that is why Titus was accused of impiety, I think is the word that is used. Yeah, so it was these Romans who, after all these, dare we call them war crimes, that they committed against the Jewish people, because Flavius Josephus, even though he's sponsored by the Roman Flavians, he makes it clear that the Romans provoked the Jews to this war. They, like for example, one of the provocations was where in the Christian scriptures it talks about how, you know, you need, you're saying the Pharisees don't greet people in the marketplaces or something like that. You have to, or Jesus gives a commandment about how you should greet people. And, well, there's a whole passage in Flavius Josephus about how whether the Pharisees greeted or didn't greet some of the Romans, it resulted in a misunderstanding that led to the death of so many Jews, even before the war happened. So just the simple greeting or not greeting somebody led to that kind of wholesale slaughter of Jews by the Romans. So the Romans made this happen. Personally, I think it's because the Judaism was very popular with non-Jews in that part of the world. Non-Jews were bringing donations to the temple, and I think the Romans just wanted some of that action. You know, they wanted to get into the temple and take that treasure off with them. So, not content to kill physically Jews, these Roman Flavians created a religion whose intent was, if not to convert Jews to their new state cult, it was at least to inoculate non-Jews against Judaism and to paint Jews and their religion, Judaism, as the work of the devil, as servitude to the devil. And because of that Roman anti-Jewish propaganda, Jews have been killed in large numbers at different points in history since that time. And one of the worst things to ever happen in the world, the invention of Islam and its wild-ass religion, because that's how Ishmael's described in the Torah, that Ishmael is a wild ass of a man. His hand will be set against every man, and every man's hand will be set against him. That perfectly describes Islam. The whole civilized Western world is now having to deal with these wild-ass Muslims and their stupid false prophet religion, because of what the Romans did in telling these fucking lies. So that's why I'm sharing this information with you, so that you can get educated and realize that maybe Jews deserve the same benefit of the doubt you would give any other human being who has blood coursing through his veins, who has a heart that pumps blood, who has a heart that feels things like fear, mourning for their dead grandparents who were killed by the Nazis, all because of this twisted Christian myth and because of Islamic jihad, because they wouldn't give Jews a little bit of time to explain why they believe the things that they do. And mind you, that Judaism is not a religion that's out to conquer the world. But you know what religion is? Well, you could say that Christianity is out to ideologically conquer the world, if not physically conquer the world, but Islam definitely aims to conquer the whole world. And we can know this because Islamic law states that any city that was once brought under Islamic law, if it should fall once again into the hands of the infidels, it must be fought for to bring it back under Islamic law. So even though teachers in Islam know that Israel belongs to the Jews, the fact that it was conquered by Salahuddin and brought under Islamic law means that they must fight for it to bring it back under Islamic law, even though they know it doesn't belong to them. That is your recipe for world domination. You think 0.2% of the world's population, the Jews, controls the whole world. Meanwhile, you've got this much bigger problem in Islam, who right in your face has a recipe for world domination and seems to be just gaining ground. They don't seem to be losing much ground. You know, Christians like to talk about, oh look, this token Muslim converted to Christianity, you know. Well, your little victories, that's all really nice, well and good. But meanwhile, the demographics, I think, has Islam gaining a significant market share in the world religion marketplace. And for them, it's not just about religion. It's about dominion. And if people don't start waking up and stop being a bunch of Dahimi wannabes, our children are going to be royally screwed over. I'm presenting to you the information that shows how the crime was carried out, why we're living under the ramifications of the trickle-down effects of that crime, so that maybe people can wake up, realize that Jews who actually see the spilling of blood as abhorrent are the real proponents of civilization in the West. You can't say it was the Romans, because the Romans were compared to a wild beast. It would go around and just tearing things up. Jews are proponents of civilization in the world. They don't believe in just spilling blood for no reason. Now, if you rise up or you threaten the children of Israel, by Jewish law, they believe that they are obligated to rise up and kill you first. So, if you're such a dumbass that you're going to tell the Jews that you intend to kill them, don't be surprised if they kill you first. Because your grandparents killed their grandparents, and they still remember it, and they're not playing. And I don't blame them one bit for securing their future. That's their obligation as human beings. So why would I blame them for doing that? here in America, we can't even secure our own future, but we're going to blame Jews for securing their future. That's retarded.